So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are very excited to present the next webinar in our Hemp How-To series. And this is, today's session is going to focus on learning how to create an integrated pest management plan and just in time for the upcoming cultivation season 2021. My name is Kalia Garrido, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Zera Hemp Labs. A little bit about us. Zera is an innovative online solution that connects hemp producers with accredited testing laboratories nationwide to ensure fast, easy, and accurate hemp testing. This webinar series is designed to provide resources and information on a variety of hemp-related topics. We're talking about cultivation, extraction, product manufacturing, wholesale, regulations, and all the other things. So in addition to this webinar series, we are also busy behind the scenes creating a ton of great written content, and we have just released our 2021 Farmers Calendar. So this is a super valuable resource for people that are looking to get into cultivation, that are looking to up-level their grow game, or people that just want to reference something that can be easy to follow and just kind of help take them through some of the major events that happen as we go through this year, through the season. Today, I am very excited to introduce Charlie McKenzie. Charlie is the co-founder. He's surprisingly, he's in like the beautiful, it's like you're in Arendelle over there with the Northern Lights.
Oh, it's something else over here.
I love it. And that was a Frozen reference for those of you that have young daughters like myself. So he is the co-founder, director of partnerships at the full service IPM consultancy CropWalk. It empowers growers to develop and manage their pest and pathogen control programs. Charlie also hosts the highly popular Crop Talk Media podcast. He is a father of two, a husband, biocontrol advisor, a friend, and a proud Georgia Bulldog. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Charlie. We are excited to hear what you have to teach.
Yeah. How about them Bulldogs? I don't know if any of you like Georgia, but hey, how about them Bulldogs?
I tried to tell Charlie that I married a Florida Gator, and Charlie tried to pull out of this webinar, and I didn't allow him to, so he is still here with us.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited for the opportunity. Really grateful for you and the team there at Zera.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
All right, let's get into it. All right, so like it was described, we're going to be discussing how you can develop your integrated pest management plan or refine it, fine tune it, depending on where you're at in that process. And something to note before we get started, some of the information that came in shared that a lot of folks that had planned on attending this were newer farmers. And so I'll make sure to bring some of that context to this discussion. Let's start with, the definition of integrated pest management. Traditionally, for the past, few decades, it's been described as an ecosystem-based strategy that focuses on long-term prevention of pests or their damage through a combination of techniques, such as biocontrol, habitat manipulation, certain cultural practices, and use of resistant varieties. And that's coming from University of California. And so, that is ever changing. How we're managing pests and diseases is constantly changing. And so with that, we want to get into a little bit more of these control methods. So of the control methods, we consider at CropWalk 5 of them to be hugely important. Genetic control, cultural control, biological control, physical control, and chemical control. When it comes to hemp and cannabis in general, the chemical control is limited. There are some products out there that are chemicals, but are still allowed to be used on cannabis and hemp. But a lot of your traditional pesticides and fungicides are not allowed to be used. So these are the 5 methods that growers are able to employ to manage their pests and disease. Now, as I described, over time, with new resources, new knowledge, new tools, integrated pest management has started to morph and change. This definition from Dr. Surendra Dara is something that we consider to be the most comprehensive definition or model to date. And there's some resources here if you want to take a look at the pest management paradigm for modern age, and dive into that yourself. You can check out that link. But essentially, it's not a principle that strictly and uniformly applies to every situation, but a philosophy that can guide the practitioner to use it as appropriate for their situation. So in the end, it's a mindset. It's a way of growing, and having that sort of perspective allows you to see that there are a lot of things that come into managing an integrated pest management program. So what's an IPM self-audit? Something that we suggest growers do every single year of their own integrated pest management program, whether they have one that is formal and on paper, or whether it's just something that they have in their mind from years past, or they're brand new and they haven't created one yet. It's worth taking the time to analyze the key variables that are going to influence your hemp integrated pest management program, which includes the input cost, the overall efficiency, and the effectiveness of the control. So let's dive into these key influencing variables. And I'm not going to say that this list is exhaustive, but this is a list that I think it's worth discussing here during our time together. So running through it, we've got production methodology, marketability and purchasing standards, history of pest and disease in that area or in your region, in your farm, your crop protection agent supply chain and how you're managing that, scouting and monitoring, biosecurity, compliance and record keeping, site-specific crop microclimates, your IPM team, and the facility or field infrastructure and how you're growing. Let's dive into production methodology here. So when we describe how hemp is typically cultivated, there are a few different ways to skin that cat, if you will. There are folks that are growing specifically for cannabinoids, and all they're looking for is biomass that can be processed, and cannabinoids can be pulled out of that. And then there's a little bit of the in-between, which is folks are growing biomass that's terpene rich, maybe has a certain set of minor cannabinoids, and they're looking to take that and process it in an unusual or unique way that brings a little bit more value than the previously described type of growing. And then there's craft production, whether that's craft to be processed in a unique way or craft to be sold as whole flower, smokable hemp flower. And so when we think about those three production techniques or goals, there's some differences in between each of those and caveats, but overall I want to kind of break them down into two different categories: the agricultural and horticultural production methodologies. And the way I describe that is on the agricultural side, it's usually higher density planting per acre. It's usually more mechanized and uses less physical manual labor. Typically, it's a lower input cost per acre, and you're typically expecting less return per acre in an agricultural model. There typically is a little bit more allowable pest and disease damage on that sort of production, and that's dependent upon your buyer, but typically versus horticultural, a little bit more allowance. And then, folks that are just growing for straight biomass, there are folks that are utilizing varieties that are much higher than 5% CBD, but with the total THC compliance rules in the past, it's been difficult. And so a lot of growers have really stayed between 5 and say 10% CBD when they're just growing straight biomass. And so differentiating that from the horticultural production is important, because horticultural production typically is a little bit lower density per acre. more manual labor, more physical input into the crop, less machinery. It's demanding a higher price at market. That also means that it has to be cleaner, free of pest and disease. And, that's typically smokable flower or terpene-rich biomass that has an intended use that's a little bit more of a value add than just the typical extraction. So knowing how you're going to produce and that there are different standards that you have to hit, whether you're producing agricultural or horticultural, and that you might want to look at your pest management program differently for those two types of growing goals. Getting into marketability and purchasing standards, having a buyer, I think anyone that's talked to you about hemp or anyone you've listened to about hemp has probably said trying to line up an offtake agreement or a purchase agreement for your crop is hugely important, and definitely suggest that. But you also want to know what they're expecting of you and understanding what those standards are. If they are going to make sure that they're testing the product in a certain way for microbials or things like that, you've got to make sure that you're controlling your pathogens and disease to a certain point. So understanding what they're expecting of you and knowing what you need to hit is hugely important. And so being able to understand that might save you some money or might make you realize you need to put a little bit more into the input of controlling pest and disease in your crop. The history of pest and disease pressure in your region is massively important. If you're growing in the South versus the Pacific Northwest, there are definitely different challenges that you're going to deal with. And so understanding what the previous crops were that were grown on the site, if you've been producing there, understanding what you've produced in the past, having those records and trying to see if there's any challenges associated with what you've planted in the past when it comes to how you're going to produce your hemp in the future. Also, use your resources wisely. There are local extension agents or the previous farmer or site manager to discuss those things with. If they've grown something there before and they said, oh man, we've had the worst two-spotted spider mite problems, that's something to note and something to take into consideration when you're developing your IPM plan. As I described earlier, there are a lot less options for producing a hemp crop when it comes to crop protection agents. If you've been growing a typical commodity crop in the past, or you've never grown a crop, you've probably heard a lot about pesticides and harsh pesticides on your food or what have you. Hemp has a pretty strict list, or I'll rephrase that. The regulators have put a pretty strict list together of what can be sprayed, and I'm in favor of having it be strict because this is product that is being consumed by humans and animals. So making sure that you understand what you're allowed to apply and also where to get that is really, really important, and especially because these products are typically perishable. And so whether it's that, it's a biorational or a biopesticide that has some sort of specific storage requirement or handling requirement or timeline to be applied, you've got to know that. So, if you're buying something, that you're going to have something effective when you go to apply it. Same for any sort of biological control agent in terms of beneficial insects. If you're employing any of those in your operation in any way, understanding their perishability, where you get them from, how often you're going to have to order those, and then, what the price is and what your options are in terms of vendors, it's going to serve you well being prepared for the season and also not overspending on crop protection supplies. This is hugely, hugely important. I'd say it's one of the most undervalued variables in a integrated pest management program. Scouting and monitoring. It's the foundational pillar of integrated pest management, in my opinion. It's labor intensive, but it saves money and a huge amount of headache over the course of the crop, as well as season to season. If you're going to grow and you intend to grow for multiple years in the future, understanding what's happening this year is definitely going to benefit you next year, if not the year after. And so scouting and monitoring, it requires trained and diligent scouts with ample bandwidth. So you need someone that has had some sort of education in identifying key pests, identifying key predators or parasitoids that are naturally coming into your crop, or the ones that you're employing and putting out into your crop. Knowing what those are and being able to observe them and monitor them over time is what you need in a scout. And you also want someone who's passionate enough to get into the details, because you have to really, really search sometimes to find young or small populations of insects before they're a big problem, so you can take care of them then. And getting back to this horticultural versus agricultural approach in production, typically as you increase the intended sale price, so as you go from biomass to terpene rich biomass to craft flower, the amount of scouting that's needed increases. So if you're growing craft flower, you're going to want to spend and budget a good amount of time on the training, as well as the physical time of your team scouting. Now, when we talk about scouting and monitoring, going out there, collecting data, and saying, okay, well, we have this problem this week. That's good, but seeing it over time and collecting objective data that isn't saying, well, we have a lot of bugs over here and a little over here. You want to switch that up and figure out a numerical system to allow you to trend data over time, to say, I've got a level 3 population of thrips here this week. Next week, when I'm employing this biological control agent, I'm hoping to see a level 2 when I go out to scout. Being able to look at it objectively and creating that system prevents you from having one scout think it's this and another scout's opinion be that it's this. So making sure you take that time and if all you're going to do the entire season for your integrated pest management program is educate your team on what they're looking for and how to know if what you're doing is working, it's hugely important, and go for it. Definitely do that. Biosecurity. This is a piece of one of the control methods, cultural controls. So biosecurity refers to the sanitation and movement of people throughout your facility or field. Being intentional is something that I think always pays dividends. And what I mean by being intentional is, there are many ways to walk through a field or walk through a facility. There are many ways to enter a field or a facility, but having a standard operating procedure for that takes a lot of the guesswork out, and it also allows you to problem solve when you do have problems. So when we talk about biosecurity specifically, understanding what you should be wearing and what sort of equipment you should have when you're touching the plants or working with the plants. If you're out in the field and you're growing for biomass in an agricultural production method, chances of you needing to suit up in a Tyvek while you're pruning plants are low. But if you're growing for craft smokable flower and your buyer has a very, very stringent acceptance policy and standard on what the flower is supposed to look like and the testing that comes back on it, you might need to be in certain PPE or certain biosecurity attire to keep yourself from tainting the product. So considering those things and understanding, again, what your buyer is looking for and what standards you have to live up to. It's hugely important. I would say more times than not, a failure in biosecurity is the root cause of pest and disease pressure. And a good example would be maybe you're growing indoor or greenhouse smokable flower, and you've got a staff of 3 or 4 folks, and it turns out that one of your staff members actually cultivates at their house, whether that's they're cultivating hemp or they're cultivating some other crop, growing fruits and veggies, but they work with those plants, and they tend to work with them before they come to work in your greenhouse. If they're not changing clothes, or if you're not asking them to do something or don new attire when they come to your crop, there's a potential that they're bringing pest or pathogen with them, and they are acting as a vector to bring them into your crop. So that's just a unique example. It's happened to me. It's happened to people I've worked with, but thinking about those things from a biosecurity standpoint is only going to benefit you. Compliance and record keeping, it's not sexy. People don't really want to talk about compliance and record keeping, but I would say with this crop, especially hemp, there's a lot of convoluted federal and state regulations. A lot of folks are confused as to what they can apply, what they can't apply. It might change based on what state you're in. It could be based on if that state has recreational cannabis laws. It could be based on the state's ag department and they're putting it under, a traditional horticultural crop. And so you have to keep standard record keeping just like one of those crops. So understanding what your state level pesticide regulations are is very much worthwhile. That'll keep you compliant. And then also, it seems like a lot of hemp growers don't recognize that if they're applying certain products and they're having their employees apply certain types of crop protection products, that they need to abide by the federal pesticide worker protection standard. And being compliant in that, I think, one is huge for your operation, but also massive for yourself and your employees, knowing how to protect yourself and keep yourself safe when you are applying products that could damage your body in the application. It's 100% worthwhile. And the saying goes, the label is the law. So when you're looking at crop protection products and it has a label, an EPA registration, and it's describing what you are allowed and not allowed to do, that is the law. So stick to it. When we talk about one of the key variables that could be hugely important to your success in growing hemp, we're going to talk about site-specific crop microclimates. So that could be, the weather outdoors in your specific field. Maybe you're in a valley in between mountains and your microclimate does something completely different than, just 15 miles down the road. That could be considered a microclimate, or just the climate and the potential microclimates within a controlled environment facility. Understanding that those microclimates will influence pest and pathogen life cycle and duration. So how are they developing? How fast are they developing? Those things are dependent upon, temperature and humidity. The BCA options and best practices that you can employ in your crop are definitely dependent on your crop microclimate. So there are certain BCAs, beneficial insects, and even biorationals that don't do as well in certain environmental conditions, whether that's low humidity, maybe a certain predatory mite doesn't do as well in low humidity, or there's a certain type of product that when you spray it, you've got to spray it at a certain time of the day and with a certain temperature to make sure it's as effective as possible. understanding those things and how your microclimate and the management of it is going to affect your crop protection agents, it's a variable to consider, definitely. The IPM team. You can't do it without the people that are actually getting out there and either scouting, monitoring, applying crop protection products. Your integrated pest management program is only as good as your worst scout, meaning that if you have someone that you're depending on to go out there and look for pest or disease and assess the situation, and they have no idea what they're looking for, chances are they're going to miss something, and that could be the downfall of your IPM program. So don't think of, integrated pest management as a side gig for the head grower, something that they work on when they're not doing their normal tasks. It is imperative that if you don't have a team that's trained or you're not trained, finding some resources to train yourselves up. There's a lot of resources out there, free resources on the internet, especially here in the past year. There are some really good hemp specific working groups, and they're regional specific as well. There's one in the West and there's one in the Southeast that are putting out a ton of information and resources on how to manage certain key pests and disease in those areas. So spend the time, sharing that with your team or reviewing it yourself if you're the one that the buck stops with when it comes to pest and disease. Formalizing the team and really making sure that someone has the responsibilities laid out, expectations, and accountability. Because oftentimes, if there isn't some sort of accountability with pest and disease management, it's just kind of everyone pointing at each other saying, well, I thought that was your job, or I thought it was your job to do this. So really making it a key piece of your production is something that I would encourage. And yeah, that's me real excited after scouting a crop and not seeing very many pests whatsoever.
So that's a good point, Charlie. Like, it seems like, I know from the people that we polled, a lot of the people, like 67% of the attendees today have said that they haven't yet started, growing their hemp. And then a lot of the people that we do talk to are small, family operations, or just like a little shop, like just kind of getting their sea legs underneath them. So in that case, it sounds like what your recommendation is learn as much as you can, right? Like, contact your team, contact whoever that can come, maybe on site and really show what this looks like in action. And then also marking somebody as the directly responsible individual that can maybe, parse out the work from there, but keeping it
absolutely tight. Yeah. If you're the only one, if you're the only one that can be responsible and accountable for this in your operation, it's something that you should spend your time on, especially here over the next couple months, because once you're in the thick of it, if you haven't grown a crop before, or you haven't grown a crop on scale before, once you're in the thick of it and you're in the middle of the season, it just feels like you're chasing your tail if you haven't come up with a plan and put some forethought into it. So, like I said, after this, I'd be happy if you get a hold of me. My contact information is at the end of this presentation. I will share a whole slew of resources, free resources that you can, consume on your own time. And then my team is happy to help point you in direction for further resources if you need something more.
That's awesome.
So when we talk about your infrastructure, I think it's critical to understand how the way that you're irrigating, the way that you've set up your field, the way that you've set up your greenhouse, how that affects your integrated pest management plan. So, if you have the ability to micro irrigate through some sort of irrigation system where you're delivering, a pulse irrigation or a small volume of water to the soil, directly to the soil or to the media, whatever it may be. That gives you a lot of advantages in terms of being able to get certain crop protection products to the soil or to the media, as well as the fact that you're not putting irrigation water over top and getting the leaf surface moist, which can create some pathogen issues. So, the fact that, say, you have that micro irrigation, that could play into you being potentially able to use certain crop protection products and maybe use less of certain ones because you're not overhead irrigating. Now, the flip side of that, if you are overhead irrigating, you probably need to think about some preventative crop protection applications to mitigate that pathogen, that hospitable environment that you're creating for a pathogen. Thinking about what you can do to your field or your greenhouse outside of the hemp crop that you're growing, and how you can potentially add crops in, whether that's a cover crop or companion planting to encourage certain beneficial insects and natural predators, or trap planting to get certain insects, pest insects to go to that plant first. Those are ways that you can use your infrastructure or kind of your overall setup to either bolster your integrated pest management plan, or to consider some things that you need to do more because of the limitations you may have with your infrastructure. Another great example, if you've got a greenhouse and you have insect netting, exclusionary netting on the cooling system or on your exhaust, whatever intake, that's going to prevent a whole ton of certain insects getting into your crop. And exclusion is, in my opinion, the best control method there is. If you can exclude them from being there, then they're not going to cause you any problems. So thinking about those things, if you've got insect netting, you can probably reduce the overall input cost when it comes to crop protection agents that you're putting out on your crop. All right. So we talked about what you should be considering when you're auditing or evaluating your integrated pest management plan. But like I described and we learned, there are a lot of folks listening here that haven't cultivated before or are very new to cultivating. And so kind of getting into what an IPM plan consists of, I think would be helpful for folks to have some sort of skeleton or framework to work off of. Now, this is what my team at CropWalk considers an IPM plan should consist of. It's ever evolving. It should be a living document and something that is not set in stone. Definitely should be living in between each year based on what you're learning. But it's never going to be set in stone. Pest and pathogen pressures change, and so does your crop production situation. What we think is important to have in this IPM plan is pathogen and pest pressure and identification information. So detailing what those key pests are, detailing what biocontrol agents that you're going to be using, and then including weekly scouting data and analysis of that data, being able to take in that objective data and analyze it to see trends and make decisions based off of it. You should have a preventative pest and disease treatment strategy. So this is kind of your baseline plan, what you think you need to do preventatively to stop pests from reaching a certain economic threshold that would that would make your crop either less valuable or worthless. So having that preventative plan, deploying it week to week and not having to recreate the wheel each week will save you a lot of time and headache. It'll also put you in a place where you're ahead of pests that you were planning for. Having those action thresholds and curative treatment options. So like I was just describing, there's a certain point at which the pest or disease pressure is going to cause you some sort of economic damage to your crop. And so setting a threshold to say, hey, we're getting close to this economic damage. I've got to do something more about it than what I did in my preventative plan is something to definitely consider. And having what you can apply in a curative situation selected and ready. Maybe it's not a product that you want to apply or a beneficial insect that you want to apply regularly and preventatively, whether that's because of how it does its job or the cost. You decide that, okay, I'm going to save this for if things get bad. So having those lined up and knowing what they are before you have the problem will save a lot of time and shuffling, and potentially will allow you to control the pests faster and more effectively, being able to get it out there and get it done right when you find the problem. Having biosecurity best practices, detailing all of your cultural control techniques, how the people move throughout the facility and the processes. Compliance and safety, we talked about that. Definitely think it's something that every IPM plan should have. At the very least, it's just a training tool for your team. If it's got a very good compliance and safety section describing what your mantra is and what your expectations are, it's something that you can hand to any person that's going to be a part of your team, and they can read it then and there and understand how you're setting the tone for your operation when it comes to compliance and safety. Detailing your team's roles and responsibilities, like we discussed earlier, formalize it. Put someone on there and say, you're accountable. This is your baby, and we'll give you whatever resources we can and empower you to do your job. And there's going to be mistakes, there's going to be challenges, but someone needs to be accountable. And then finally, any of that information that we just described, if you can document it and make it something that can be consistently executed upon, that will allow you to either scale your integrated pest management program if you decide to grow more next year, or if you need to hand it off to someone else, if you change roles or you move up within the business or you hire someone, being able to hand them, like I said, this document with all of these pieces of the puzzle in them that you've updated each year after each season, it will be invaluable. So I'm going to describe, this is an example of what we would typically put in an IPM plan. Aphids as an example, this pest right here. So documenting the primary, secondary, and tertiary pests and pathogens in your region or your specific microclimate, creating an ID and life cycle guide. So over here, the image, understanding, the different points in the life cycle, how quickly the insect develops at certain temperatures or environmental parameters, and being able to share that information with every person that touches the plant. I think a lot of folks only want to share or only think it's necessary to share this information with growers or managers or scouts and folks that are out there specifically working on the IPM program. But everyone that is working for you most likely has a set of eyes that they can be using while they're doing their other tasks, whether that's cleaning, whether that's pruning the plants. Teaching them what the pests and pathogen symptoms are allows them to spot something when you weren't even trying to have someone spot something. You weren't sending them out there to scout, you're sending them out there to do something else. So share this type of information at the very least with everyone on your team that's going to come across a plant or work with it. This is an example of ways that growers have taken their scouting and monitoring program, made it objective, in nature and created a numerical system to describe the insect pressure. Bug Vision is a platform that one of my buddies, Sebastian Leroux, has created and has been developing for a few years. Essentially, a lot of growers are using Excel files to manage their scouting data. But what I find is a grower will send me their Excel data and say, it's a lot of data, but I really can't get much from it. So being sure that your data is objective, and also you're collecting it and analyzing it in a way that you can get some sort of relevant decision-making tools out of it, is something I would definitely focus on. Create the SOPs that describe how you scout and monitor. Don't say, hey, these are the things you're looking for. I want to teach you about them. Go do it. Be intentional with how you want them to walk through the crop. Are they walking through certain blocks? Are they zigzagging through that block? Are they looking at the edge of the block of plants and the middle? Or are they looking at just the edge? Having those sorts of considerations and that written out for someone to follow will allow you to get consistent data, and then that drives decision making. One of my favorite quotes when it comes to scouting and monitoring and just data collection is, to measure is to know. If you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. So a lot of folks are focused on controlling pest and disease, but they don't really know how much pests or disease they truly have and how the products or beneficial insects they're applying are working. So spend the time on weekly scouting and data collection. At the very least, if you can't figure out a data collection system, just being out in the crop and walking the crop and understanding what's going on and being there frequently will allow you to make better decisions. So this is an example of a preventative strategy that we've created for some folks. And this is actually a leafy greens strategy that we've created. And it's showing you what you could do in terms of a preventative strategy and how you might document that. But, looking at it from the standpoint of, I'm going to create a plan from start to finish with my best laid plans and what I think needs to happen to prevent economic damage. That's what's going to really, really save you in the end. I've been in situations where I just didn't have a plan put together, and that plan could have saved me thousands and thousands of dollars because I sort of knew what products I needed, but I didn't have them on hand. I didn't have it planned out at what rate I was going to put them out at. And even the equipment at the time, I really hadn't planned for how I was going to apply it effectively. So thinking about those things and just being prepared will go a long way. When we describe these action thresholds or curative options, the density of pests that warrants a curative action, it's not something that you really want to find. You might find it, and I hope you do find it at a point right before it's causing significant economic damage, or you're finding it where it's not really causing any damage. But sometimes it happens, whether it's something that comes in really, really quickly, or an environmental parameter changes and you can't control it, and you have some sort of pathogen rear its ugly head. Just knowing what you need to use to kind of put the fire out and having that ready is something I would definitely be prepared for. It's a situation where some of these products that you might use in a curative application sense, you might not be able to get them quickly like you need them. So it might be, you find out that, oh man, I have this problem. I really need to apply something curatively to stop the problem in its tracks. but I can't get a hold of it for another 5 days. It's going to take, 2 days of processing and 3 days of shipping to get here, or what have you. It might not be available at the local hardware store or the local ag supply store. So you could be in a jam, and those 5 days, depending on what pest it is, could be a huge difference for you. So having your action thresholds, knowing when you need to make a decision to pull out the curative option, will give you a sense of control throughout the season. You can't have a sound IPM program without cultural control methods. I'm going to go back to the 5 IPM control methods here. Genetic control, find a variety that works for your area. Hopefully the genetic supplier can describe how it performed phenotypically in your environment, whether that was, someone grew it there, they had customers growing it there. It's important to know that. But when we talk about the other things that you're doing, we talked about chemical control options, which could be, on the curative side. We talked about biocontrol, but cultural control, I think it just gets overlooked more often than it should. And really the reason is because it's mostly related to people's behavior and having a certain thought process on how you should behave in a crop to prevent pest and disease. If you can prevent them, you don't have to worry about action thresholds. So focus on exclusion, not allowing pest and disease to come in. I'll give you a great example. One of my friends who is on the podcast, and I'd encourage you to check out that podcast. His name is Tim Nolan. And his team, has a greenhouse, and it's in Canada, and they're producing recreational cannabis. But when you look at it from a production perspective, it would be akin to someone producing craft smokable hemp flower. And one of the things that they do before they start work is every single member of their staff that is going to be touching the plants or in the production room has to shower in and change their clothes into fresh laundered scrubs from the facility. And so that is a great example of exclusion. It's just a massive opportunity to kind of clear the slate and say, hey, we know you're coming in clean. So exclusion if you can. And then there are some things that you're not going to be able to get around. If you can't afford to put in a system like that and to have everyone go in and shower, which I would say most people can't, then you've got to really look at the processes and documenting those processes and analyzing them so you can be consistent and you can prevent challenges associated with you being a vector or creating pest and disease problems. I would say it's worthwhile investing in compliance and safety for all aspects of your operation. Someone told me that works with a lot of regulators. I really took it to heart when she said, think of your regulatory agents as resources that allow you to stay current and compliant. Like I said before, it's not sexy to focus on compliance and safety, but if you're using your resources wisely and you're building a relationship with the regulators or the folks that represent them or work with them, it gives you an opportunity to be above board and transparent and say, we're doing the best we can to be compliant. And we want to know how to do it better. I think that goes a long way compared to someone saying, don't come out and see me, don't want to see you. And when they do come to see you, you've got a lot of problems. They're going to look at that differently. So set up systems to stay up to date on licensing requirements, whether that's getting your pesticide applicator's license, getting a fit test so you can wear the PPE, getting your continuing education credits, and making sure that you've got solid pesticide application records. Team roles and responsibilities. In that IPM plan, like I described, formalize your IPM team, assign roles. Who's going to scout? Who's going to apply certain products? A lot of the products that you're applying take some sort of knowledge on how to apply them for them to be used effectively. So you can't just have anyone come in and start applying certain biological control agents and expect them to be successful with it. So assign roles, increase your accountability, and really detail what it is that they're supposed to take care of. We're going to rehash this one because I think that as growers and farmers, we like to grow. We like to farm. We don't necessarily like to sit down at a computer or with some pen and paper and document what it is we've been doing or what we've seen. And I think it goes for all of your production, whether you're talking about, trying to understand how you can yield more next year or how you can get a better cannabinoid percentage. I think having your experiences documented and what you've learned will help you do those things. But with integrated pest management, not having that information, it's really hard to remember what day did I first see that first caterpillar on my flower. If you don't have that written down, you're really not going to remember that most likely next year. And that could be an important date. It might be a date that you need to have burned in your memory, and having it written down is something that you can go back and look at. I think when we talk about growing knowledge in general, typically growing knowledge, pest management knowledge is tribal in nature. It's not passed down through written word or documentation nearly as much as it should be. And so I encourage you to spend as much time documenting what it is you're doing and what you're learning, so that if you decide to sell the business, you get hit by a bus, God forbid, someone's got that information and it doesn't stay with you forever and ever. Hey, happy hemping, folks.
That's happy hemping. I love that. Thank you so much for that, Charlie. There's so much to this, right? I think it's like what you said, like we're plant people and we're farmers, and I think people, it's one of the things that you don't necessarily think of, and then you're finding yourself in the situation where, oh crap, I should have thought of that. And this is a really, really solid heads up for a lot of people that this is a part of farming. So awesome. Okay. All right. Well, I think in conclusion, there's like very little doubt that if anybody has any questions, they should reach out to your team. If this is to get eyes on an existing plan and make sure that it's kind of fully buttoned up, if it's blank field, just ready to put plants in the ground, what do we need to think? It sounds like, the team at CropWalk is the way to go. And so just like Charlie has here, it's cropwalk.ag to be able to find them online. We are Zera Hemp Labs. We would love to help with any of the hemp testing that you might need. I promised that I would share more information, which I will do via email, on how to get the 2021 Hemp Farmers Cultivation Calendar that will give you some important dates and pieces of information for how you can find what to do and when, depending on your specific region in the United States. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Expect that follow-up email. And Charlie, thank you for dropping massive knowledge bombs on us. It sounds like it is the perfect time to be thinking about all this, and it's good to have it up front. It's exactly like you said, having a plan can save you thousands of dollars. I can't think of any cleaner way to put that. So
thousands of dollars, and I'll add, once you get into growing hemp, you'll think about the month of September as being a month of sleepless nights, and a lot of times it's sleepless nights because of pest and disease. So if you want to sleep well, focus early.
Yeah. Man, we need more good sleep these days, I think. If this is something you can prevent, why not prevent it? Cool. Thanks, all right. Man. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Adios.
Bye-bye.